I'm going to start this review by cutting to the chase. The PG27UQ is a revolutionary monitor that's not just a little bit better than what I've used before, but a literal game changer that leaves all but the X27 firmly in the dust behind. But despite this, there's actually quite a few reasons that stop me from wholeheartedly recommending this. And it's a bit of a tricky one because this is probably the most important review I've had to do in the last 2 years. So I've wanted to make it as comprehensive as possible so you know everything there is to know about the ultimate gaming display. The PG27UQ, or PG27U as it's also known, is a 27-inch 4K gaming monitor with HDR, G-Sync and a maximum refresh rate of up to 144Hz. It's important to know that there are some limitations though that actually reduce the maximum refresh rate of the screen. So for full colour reproduction, you're going to need to leave the screen at 120Hz in SDR mode and then 98Hz in HDR mode. As for the overall design language, well, it's classic ROG, and it features very aggressive styling, including some beam lighting that actually shines above and below the monitor. You can turn this off, as I have done here, otherwise I was a little bit scared that Batman might turn up, because this thing is very, very bright. The stand itself though has a complete set of adjustments, including pivot, tilt and swivel, but it's really cheesed me off a bit to be honest, as the monitor is actually quite far forward on its legs, which results on the monitor that's just, well, too far forward, even on my rather deep desk. If Asus didn't want this review sample back, then I probably would have wall mounted it by now to get around this problem, which of course you can do with the Visa standard. You also need to know that in terms of I/O, it's a little limited with only DisplayPort 1.4 and HDMI 2.0, but this is probably all you're going to need anyway. So that's everything you need to know about the design, but I want to talk image quality because let's be honest, I think that's probably the most important thing, and it's what we've all been waiting almost 2 years to actually, well, see if it's any good. So is it any good? Well, from the moment I took this thing out of the box and put it on my desk, I felt a little bit bittersweet. You see, the panel does indeed look fantastic. Full 4K resolution, 120Hz of velvety smoothness, and then that lovely warmth from that quantum dot panel. Everything is just so sharp, and the IPS display offers such a colourful look to everything you throw at it, while maintaining the accuracy that professionals desire. But the thing is, I've seen great looking displays before, and in this 27-inch form factor, well, it just failed to almost provide that new wow factor that I was longing for. It was a really odd feeling, as for such an expensive monitor, I expected to be dazzled and blown away with something entirely new. But I wasn't. So what is the deal then, and why is everyone going on about this display? Why is it so important? Well, it turns out it's down to 3 letters. HDR. Now I've used plenty of HDR screens before, but never anything like this. With increased colour volume, 1000 nits of peak brightness and a full array local dimming system, this is what high dynamic range really should be like. Unlike so many cheap HDR displays that merely accept an HDR10 signal and then don't really do anything with it at all, the PG27UQ makes supported games look far superior than ever before. It just makes the whole scene look more lifelike, it adds more contrast, more colour, but it does it in a really realistic way. And for once the sky is actually bright, the whole scene isn't just one level of brightness. It's really hard to explain, and it took me a long time to really get my head around how it all works and why you'd want it in the first place. But let me say this. This is the first instance of HDR that's ever really made me believe in the tech, and it has made me realise that great HDR can be far more noticeable than 4K resolution alone. Drilling down into gaming a little bit more, I've mainly been using this for PUBG and Far Cry 5. Though of course I have dipped my toes into a whole range of HDR titles to fully understand and appreciate this display's capabilities. Now obviously the big concern here is with PUBG, as this is not an HDR title on the PC. But despite this, it still handles it very well, with a 120Hz refresh rate allowing for snappy and responsive movement, while smoothing out the frame rate with G-Sync. It is certainly a big step up versus other displays, but once again, the 27-inch form factor here just isn't really all that immersive. Fire up Far Cry 5 though, and oh my word does this look good. We do need to reduce the refresh rate to 98Hz to avoid losing any colour detail, but this is exactly what next level gaming looks like. It's amazing that console gamers have been enjoying this on their fancy TVs for a while now, but mouse and keyboard gaming at 98 frames a second with G-Sync is a ridiculously good experience. I honestly had no idea that a display could make such a big difference, but ultimately it does. And don't go thinking that just because this is a class-leading panel in terms of image quality that it's not responsive, because while it's not the absolute best I've ever used, it's really not that far off, with TFT Central reporting an input lag figure of 8.14 milliseconds, which is actually very similar to the PG348Q. On a perfect day then, this is the best display you can get for PC gaming. But unfortunately it's not quite as simple as that, because there are a couple of problems that we do need to go through. The first is with that HDR tech, as it's still quite new, which means the library of supported titles is, well, not really all that big. This won't be a huge problem going forward, as I'm sure support will get better and better, but I'd wager that most of your current Steam library is a little bit out of luck. Then there's also a few issues with Windows. So to get around any games looking weird and contrasty and clearly not right, you're going to want to fix this by making sure that HDR is enabled in the Windows settings and that your game is full screen by cycling Alt-Enter. And then finally, because this uses a clever backlight zoning system, sometimes you will get some haloing around mouse cursors. And I'm afraid you're not really going to be able to get around this very easily, because you can turn the zone dimming off altogether. But obviously this isn't going to help in games because you're pretty much losing that HDR. But fortunately, this was never really noticeable in real world use at all, only in the Windows desktop on grey backgrounds, in which you can just turn off HDR and it does fix it. So HDR can sometimes behave like a small child, but like a small child, this will grow up over time. I'm really proud of that line, I didn't script it. But for me, I think the bigger issue with this display, and is probably the main reason that I personally will not be placing an order for this, just comes down to the form factor. If you follow the channel, you know I use a 38-inch ultrawide, which is definitely a little bit overkill, but I just prefer a bigger monitor. I'm sorry, whether it's for productivity or gaming, I just find it better. And while I certainly can use this without any issues at all, it's not something I'm prepared to invest that much money in for my personal use case scenario. Then there's 4K to talk about, which does of course bring the issue of frame rates. And I've been using a 1080 Ti for all of my testing, and this is the minimum I think you're going to need to get anywhere near 120Hz. And even then you're going to have to drop a lot of the settings. So for me, I was dropping the resolution scale down to around about 90% and running the games at high. And then finally, price. You probably already knew this, but this monitor costs around about £2,300 or $2,000 at the time of filming, which is so much more expensive than any other gaming monitor I've ever tested. It's absolutely crazy. Now, I totally understand that this is a new, low-volume product that required a lot of R&D and testing, but while the price may well be fair from that perspective, it doesn't make it any easier to swallow. If it were £500 less, then I would seriously be considering picking this up, and it would be much easier to recommend. But at the current price, it's a really difficult pill to swallow. But if you're prepared to spend that much money on a monitor that's in this shape and has things like the limited HDR support, and you have the graphics card and stuff to be able to drive it, then I think it's going to be a great purchase for you and you're going to love it. But likewise, if you're maybe a little bit unsure, then maybe wait a little bit. There's no hurry. There are some more similar products coming out that may suit you better, and if there aren't, then you know that this is the monitor for you. I guess my advice actually is don't rush into it. Maybe monitor the price and just see how you feel in a week's time. If you do want to check out current pricing, I will leave my links down in the description below. As always, a massive thank you to Asus ROG for sponsoring the channel, but as always, this video was my own, and it was so difficult to script and write. So I guess like this video if you've enjoyed it, and stay tuned and subscribe for the X27 video, which should also be coming very soon. We got there in the end, 2 years in the making. I hope you've enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more content. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.